Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Liam Eagle, and I am a research director at 451 Research, part of the S&P Global Market Intelligence. I'll be presenting part of today's session entitled Beyond Variable Costs, Integrating Fixed Cost Pricing in Cloud FinOps Strategies. But more importantly, I'll be moderating a discussion on that topic with an excellent group of panelists whom I will introduce in a moment. Before that, a bit of quick housekeeping. So you are able to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll be saving some time at the end of the session to address questions submitted by the attendees, but please feel free to submit them throughout the presentation. As I've said, the focus of today's session is on a panel discussion. We have 4 excellent panelists with me today. I should note here that the QR codes you're seeing on the screen take you to that person's LinkedIn page so you can connect in that way. If you can't get to them before I advance this slide, don't worry. I will leave this slide up during the panel discussion and you'll have lots of time to follow them then. I've already introduced myself, so I'll just move left to right across the panels here. Todd Robinson is president at cloud infrastructure company Open Metal, as well as several related businesses, including InMotion Hosting. In addition to founding technology organizations, Todd is an advocate and ambassador for open source cloud technology projects, things like OpenStack and Ceph. Ray Meyers is chief financial officer at Open Metal, where he leads financial strategy and operations, including the financial frameworks that enable its private cloud platform. He brings a finance and a leadership perspective to this discussion of FinOps. Anirudh Murali is co-founder and CEO of Economize, which is a cloud financial management platform. He's a computer scientist and a certified FinOps practitioner whose focus is on enabling efficient cloud cost management. And Erik Norman is founder and CEO of Caligo, a cloud solutions expert and a certified FinOps consultant. And he's certainly dressed the part. He's focused on helping his clients optimize financial operations, and he emphasizes collaboration and the alignment of financial strategy with business goals. So let me really quickly touch on the agenda. I'll be beginning today's session by sharing some details from some of our end user survey data, which looks at some attitudes, intentions, and challenges and other impressions around cloud infrastructure and the costs associated with operating that infrastructure. So we'll look at trends surrounding spending on technology. We'll look at the concept of cost and complexity in the context of cloud. We'll look at some attitudes and strategies around FinOps. And then from there, we'll shift over to the panel discussion where we'll talk through some of the challenges and opportunities facing companies when it comes to controlling cloud cost. And then we will wrap up with some attendee Q&A. And I'll reiterate, please submit your questions throughout the session. I'll start with some spending trends. So this slide includes data from 451 Research's Tech Demand Indicator, which is a representation of intention to spend money on technology in the current and in the coming quarter among US businesses and consumers. It's based on surveys of folks who are involved in buying technology in both of those contexts. It's a 100-point scale where scores higher than 50 denote sort of overall positivity towards spending. These are findings that are sort of up to and including results that we gathered during Q2. The top row describes the overall degree of intention to spend, which after more than a year in sort of the negative range, the anticipating declining spend, reached the positive range in Q4 of last year and has since sort of plateaued in that slightly positive level, projects to sort of continue that way into Q3, but there are standout areas of technology. We also ask businesses about their intention to spend on individual types of technologies. And during the time we've been doing this, like everyone, we've seen this ever increasing attention toward artificial intelligence in terms of attention and focus to the point where it is now at the top of that list of technologies that businesses are expressing an intention to spend on or to increase their spending on. I want to make it very clear that's not, in absolute terms of dollars spent relative to cloud or relative to information security or things like that, but it's the focal point right now. And of course, we've also seen a consistent intention to spend on some more foundational technologies. Things like cloud infrastructure and information security are always at the top of that list. And in some cases, you can see very clearly how those things support AI initiatives, which of course require compute power, which of course require data protection. So the simple point I want to make here to kick off this discussion of cloud spending is that our research tells us businesses in general are investing in the cloud, and they're expecting to increase their investment in the cloud to a degree that stands out from the more sort of tentative intentions about spending on technology in general. Cloud is a spending focus. So having committed to embracing cloud, often as a recurring and incrementally growing area of cost. Organizations face this new range of challenges that contribute to what I will sort of broadly describe here as complexity or cost complexity. And there are a few key factors that our survey research tells us are quite consistent across the organizations that we speak to. One of those is that cloud is now a ubiquitous resource. It's widely adopted across organizations. It's widely viewed as core IT infrastructure by those organizations. Most organizations are using public cloud. Most of them are using it pretty broadly for production applications. However, IT infrastructure environments also remain pretty diverse and often hybrid. Most organizations are using public cloud, but only few are only using public cloud. Legacy environments persist. Many organizations also intend to modernize their infrastructure in place within their own data centers. The cloud itself is complex, and it continues to grow more complex as the sort of pace of innovation leads to new features and new pricing nuances continuously emerging. Our cloud pricing index tool, which benchmarks cloud cost, as of May of this year, was tracking 6 million individual SKUs across the 3 major hyperscalers. And the power to consume cloud is becoming more distributed, with the ability to provision resources being driven by software and tooling and existing in the hands of a greater group of users. Spending is now even more reliant on effective policy. So all of these factors contribute to complexity in the concept of cloud cost and really explain the rise of FinOps as a practice, as a set of technologies, as they almost demand that businesses develop capability around controlling cloud cost. Not every business we talk to is comfortably taking that requirement around developing those capabilities in stride. In fact, many of them report some struggles with the notion of cost when it comes to public cloud. This remains a challenge for some organizations. It comes up in a variety of different surveys we've conducted. Businesses cite price or operating cost as a critical consideration when deciding where they're going to put a workload. So that's just sort of a foundational idea. When we ask them, where is cloud maybe not meeting their expectations, the most common place where they say that, where they report public cloud not meeting their expectations is TCO. I will say that the feeling around cloud TCO is generally mostly positive, but this was a sort of a hot spot or the largest area of criticism. Many organizations say they're exceeding their budgeted cloud spending. Now, that could be due to business growth. That could be due to them moving faster with modernizing than they expected. But also, we definitely hear organizations saying they want to be better at budgeting for cloud. When we ask what environments are the best equipped to meet operating cost requirements, only about a quarter of organizations point to public cloud. So it doesn't necessarily stand out among them as the answer to their sort of cost requirements or the answer to their cost questions. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a question of the qualities of the cloud itself. I think this is a question of how equipped are organizations to extract the value they want from the cloud. For a while now, we've sort of observed that, just to put it in the very simplest terms, businesses tend to adopt cloud with the intention of a benefit to operating cost, but cloud does not innately provide a cost benefit. It can provide a cost benefit, but that is an architectural challenge and an operational challenge. And I don't think that is surprising organizations at quite the rate it was maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So businesses using cloud want to solve for these challenges. Most of the cloud users we survey say that they are currently using or are in the process of implementing FinOps tools and FinOps practices. And the intention around that adoption, as you can see here, aligns very closely with the key challenges they say they're facing regarding cloud spend. They want to improve budgeting and forecasting. They want better visibility into their usage. They want better cloud spending policy and governance. They want to take better advantage of the nuances of vendor pricing. And in general, they want to get more value out of the dollar they're spending on cloud. So many organizations are adopting FinOps practices and tools as a means of controlling cost complexity. However, there's another vector to this where a significant portion of organizations we talk to say their efforts to control costs or to create the most value includes operating some things outside of typical public cloud environments, Most organizations we talk to say their IT strategy is going to involve a degree of hybrid cloud, where they strive to make their on-premises environments interoperable with public cloud. Nearly half of organizations say they've deployed workloads into private cloud environments, whether that's hosted or on-premises, in the last year. Nearly a quarter of organizations say that they've moved something out of public cloud in the last year. And this isn't necessarily at odds with moving things into cloud, by the way. This isn't sort of an organizational policy of leaving cloud. It's just maybe they've found things that they want to do somewhere else, or maybe they've sort of failed to properly implement them. And then about a third of organizations say they expect their primary IT environment 2 years from now will be a modernized on-premises environment, which may be a stepping stone to operating more holistically in public cloud. But for now, many organizations see some things remaining on premises in a more modern environment. So these may not necessarily be describing best practices, but these intentions and these attitudes persist. Many organizations see it as necessary or prudent to have IT resources that are outside of public cloud. So that's an attitude that we can examine in our panel discussion, and let's move into that right now. I've already introduced the panel, but I'll bring the slide back up, as I said, so you have access to the QR codes. You are able to move and resize the tools in the platform, so you may also want to shift your attention from the slide view to the speaker view, where you can see all the people who are speaking better. I'll also remind you that you can submit your questions during this part of the discussion, and we'll get to them at the end of the discussion. And with that, let's get to the conversation. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys very much for being patient while I delivered our preamble. We've looked at some attitudes and some perceptions around cloud cost, but I wanted to take a moment to compare sort of perception versus reality when it comes to comparing the cost of cloud to the cost of operating on premises, or to doing something else altogether. In your view, what should be the basis for that comparison? And Erik, I know that we've already had a bit of a conversation about that, so I'd like to invite you to speak on that, please.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to invite everyone to think about what cost actually is. Many people just look at the bill, try to compare the on-prem bill versus the cloud bill, and don't think about the other costs that are involved. Also, you mentioned total cost of ownership. The thing is, typically on cloud, you're moving faster than on-prem. That's statistic. And so that means the total cost of ownership per hour, or is that for the whole project? Because that also determines how much the cost will be per time unit, right? And the other thing is that it's very difficult to estimate other costs that are very hidden. If you have, for example, a legacy company that wants to move to the cloud, what they sometimes do is they hire a bunch of experts and delegate all that responsibility of moving to the cloud to them. And basically that's a huge risk also. As a chef once said, a restaurant chef said, you want to have the kitchen in-house, right? You cannot outsource everything. So you should have that close to your home, and that is obviously a risk. But also the thing is, how can I put this? While moving faster in the cloud means also that you're outpacing your competition. And that reduces the cost of losing customers to the competition. That's very difficult to quantify, but that obviously applies only to businesses that make sense to go fast and ship features fast. If you're a slow-moving giant, they're heavily regulated, like a bank or any financial institution or energy company or stuff like that, then it might also make sense to stay on-prem and go slowly but steadily, because your biggest strategic goal is to be compliant with regulatory laws and stuff like that. You prefer to burn money rather than break any of the laws, right? And so you must align your strategy, your IT strategy, and the cost connected to it with your organizational strategy.
Yeah, if you don't mind,
Right.
I'll jump in and add to, I think, where Erik is going there, because we definitely see this. So a little background on Open Metal, so you can, from a perspective where we'll come from. We're this merge of a private cloud and a public cloud. So we offer what's called on-demand private cloud. It's in our data centers. We're spinning it up on demand, right? But we give the whole infrastructure over to the individual customer, and then they utilize this kind of cloud native AWS clone for simplification of it themselves. And so we definitely have that perspective of like, we're kind of like right in that middle spot. But building on what Erik is saying is like, there are definitely times for the public cloud that are brilliant. This is when you should be in there, right? Is you want to move fast, you want to test it, you need to be able to let your development team, I'm going to use like a real live example for us. Like, so we have a workload that's moving through the system right now that it's an AI-based system. They're currently writing against OpenAI's APIs. But very shortly after that, we're going to deliver to them a private AI cluster, which is native. You can talk to the API exactly the same way as you can to OpenAI. But they don't need to wait for us to build the production cluster. They can get out there, prove the system, get it into whichever version they're comfortable with before it goes out to the customer. And so what I'm saying is like, absolutely, there are great times for the public cloud, the traditional public cloud. But you want to watch out for your tipping point. There's always a tipping point in an organization, you know. So traditionally, when we see it coming in, I'll list some numbers, but again, I would still stress that this is always a variable based upon the situation you're in. But we often have customers come in that say, "Hey, I'm running $20,000 a month on a public cloud," and you're kind of like, you're really not going to get the value to jump to like this on-demand private cloud, or of course make an even further jump into a co-location. Or all the way down to making your own data center, which is a very rare thing that we run into. So I won't really talk about that. But the tipping point is critical. And so you'll see, 20,000 and below, just run yourself in the public cloud. Maybe you can look at a couple different kinds of public clouds. When you start to get up into the 50 range, 50,000 a month, you really want to start having these options. And I'm sure most of the viewers on the call are probably in the spot where they have infrastructure in many different places, right? So you can already look and say, hey, which ones are efficient for me? Which ones are not efficient? Which ones scale-wise would make sense for me? And especially when you start to see things like large development environments over $50,000 a month or $100,000 a month, you really want to say, okay, I need some options here. So I know, Anirudh, you probably jump in with some ideas here. Anirudh represents a software company that actually helps customers optimize on the cloud, right? So there's going to be stages that companies go through as they look at this tipping point. But I would definitely say you want to be really clear. There are tipping points, like Liam had up there. Many companies have been moving into these private cloud systems, or they've been taking it all the way back to co-location, or if they had a sunk cost data center, back into their data center. But I would just say there's a lot of options. There's and I would encourage people to think about their tipping points, but to know that there are bare metal providers who are great, that have really strong networking systems that are highly automated, that you can create your infrastructure within. There's on-demand private cloud companies like us that can also provide this middle ground. So yeah, I would just say there's tipping points out there. I always throw out, if you just search on public cloud tipping point or public to private cloud tipping point, you're going to end up with a set of information, some of it from us, that helps people kind of look at, hey, where is that tipping point? When do I need to start learning about this? Or when is public cloud great for me? We have public cloud customers that buy from us, so of course we love public cloud. But I would just say there's tipping points. You want to be aware of what they are.
Great. So let's sort of, that's a good transition into my next question, I guess, which is, how does fixed cost pricing fit into a strategy for FinOps or for controlling cloud costs in general? So let's start with you, Todd, since you're already sort of speaking on this note.
Yeah, I would just say so. It's kind of that logical extension of the tipping point that just says there are times when there are workloads. Let's say, I'll just pick some numbers. So as a company, you have an infrastructure spend that varies between $200,000 and $250,000 a month. Let's just pick some numbers in here. And so when you're looking at this, you're saying like, hey, I have a variable spend that's inside of there, but this fixed spend that I'm constantly doing, you just gotta kind of ask yourself to say like, well, that fixed spend, What's the work to modify it to take more advantage of kind of the benefits of the public cloud, where it grows and shrinks on a relatively short by minute or by hour utilization, versus can I actually do that, or should I just say, like, look, let me find a fixed cost provider that I'm going to fit within their model, and that's the number that I know that I'm going to be paying every month. And once you do that, so one of the things with these tend to be the really large clouds, we call them the mega clouds, they tend to have built their system this way, which is it's designed to grow and shrink with the resources that your applications or systems need on some kind of time basis. Well, a lot of stuff is like that, but a lot of stuff would have to be built like that to truly take advantage of it. And sometimes I just say, like, this is what we hear from the customer, it's just not worth it to do that. And you'll hear sometimes you say, like, hey, you just lifted and shifted it into there. Well, in some cases, yes, you did that because it's a real pain to re-architect it. And so those are often the workloads where you should say, let me just find a fixed cost provider. I can take that workload and I can put that into there, and it's 50% less. Because the public cloud, in a great way, has built to be super resilient, super production ready, all the stuff that you want. But let's say you're running a giant development workload. Well, it doesn't need 5 nines, right? It needs 4 nines or 99.95. And that's where the fixed cost providers typically come in to say, like, cool, I don't want to mess with lift and shift. I don't want to mess with moving away from lift and shift. I'm just going to take those workloads and put them in with you guys. That's what we see most typically for us, is that type of workload where they've just said, like, look, this is we like how it works. It's just too expensive. You hate to say it that way, but we like how it works. It's just too expensive. So, yep, that's my piece. Let's get some others to jump in here on that.
Right. So, Anirudh, I wanted to invite you to answer that question as well. So,
yeah,
how does
I think I can comment on across all the companies that we've seen in public cloud, mostly in AWS, GCP, and Azure, a significant portion of the cloud cost is typically a fixed cost, and FinOps Foundation calls it as FinOps maturity, and they have crawl, walk, and run. And organizations typically have at least 50% of their workloads in the form of fixed cost. This could be in reserved instances or savings plan or committed usage discounts in GCP or sustained usage discounts. And the benefit that comes with this is the predictability, the variance that you have with your estimated and forecasted spend, and the actual spend typically comes down to probably 10 or 15%. And in case if you don't have a significant fixed cost, that probably is somewhere between 25 to 30%. And when you have a significant portion of your cloud as fixed cost, it gives you bandwidth to look at optimization of that services. So typically companies have their core services in the form of fixed workloads, and probably batch jobs or CI workloads, they tend to be variable workloads. And also it brings in good amount of transparency and accountability. You get to attribute certain costs to different teams, different organizations, different companies under your parent organization. And engineering teams provide with proper resource requirements when you have a significant portion as fixed cost. And also finance teams contribute on the flexibility that you have, either a 1-year commitment or a 3-year commitment, depending upon, or upfront payment or partial upfront. So across all the companies we've seen, it's definitely 50% plus in fixed cost. And some companies that have mature FinOps practice, they have somewhere between 75 to 80%, and they incur lesser anomalies, lesser cost spikes. But yes, from an organization standpoint, every organization should have a significant portion of their cloud cost as a fixed cost.
So you mentioned, commitments. Is there? I mean, I guess are there risks to dealing with fixed cost pricing? And if so, are there ways to mitigate those risks? I want to start with Erik there.
Yeah, sure. One typical problem is you reserve something for 3 years and then they decommission the workload after 1 day. That can happen. How to mitigate that? Well, one is the pillars of FinOps is communication, collaboration. So you need to talk with the different workload owners and anticipate basically how the plans, the roadmaps are going to be. That's one way to obviously to do it. The other way that you can do is actually use convertible reserved instances, for example, that means that you reserve instead for a fixed usage type or resource type, that you make it convertible, and then when the resource you don't need any longer has been terminated, you just swap that over to another resource of a different type, maybe within maybe a certain category of family service, depends on the cloud service provider. And actually, you could do that even as a strategy. What I oftentimes do for my customers is I start with the smallest possible instance type, reserve it for 3 years, even if they don't even have one of that type. And then I convert it to a, I don't know, 10 or 20 times more expensive resource. And by that, I reduce the duration of the commitment, and thus also the risk, right? There are even tools, you can do it manually, but honestly, if you do it on a large scale, then there are automation tools that do it for you. Otherwise, you need basically a full-time team just to do that, and they will never be as efficient as automation. But that are basically the principal ways to mitigate risk for fixed price costing, yeah, at least in public cloud.
Yeah, we have a similar, because we run into this, of course. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Liam. Yeah.
Well, I was going to invite Ray to speak on that.
Thank you, Liam. Yeah, I think what Erik said is very logical. It really starts at really identification of your business needs, both in short term and in long term. We found that working with a vendor that will work with you can structure agreements for your short-term fixed costs leading into long-term commitments. And that way you can really match your value that you're receiving to the price that you are paying. And so it really comes down to collaboration, like Erik says, FinOps principles, is talking within your organization, within all of the groups, be it finance, be it product development, procurement, and knowing your data prior to making a commitment. There's nothing wrong with fixed cost pricing as long as it meets your business needs. Using short-term agreements is a very, very promising strategy that we've seen a lot, leading into longer-term agreements. There's nothing wrong with that. The one thing that companies need to watch out for is really overcommitting, obviously. And the second thing is variable pricing on the downside, meaning that if you have runaway applications, you could get a surprise bill. Now, FinOps has strategies to really to limit those, but it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Liam, I'll throw in that we
Todd, did you want to add something
this. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just throw in that when you're our type of business, this on-demand private cloud where you're basically buying in very large blocks of equipment, we get this question a lot to say like, hey, well, what's going to happen if I only use 60 or 70% of that, or these workloads? I've got all these VMs that may ultimately go away the very next day. One of the things that I always encourage people to learn about when it comes to private clouds, this is your private cloud. And so I think it's common knowledge in the public cloud, pretty much everything they sell is oversubscribed. And oversubscribed simply just means that statistically, most VMs are used somewhere between like 25 and 35% when you actually balance the utilization out over long periods of time. It obviously spikes up to the maximum that the VM can do at certain time periods, and you have to buy the VM that at the size that's appropriate to do that. Now, in the public cloud world, it works the same way from within the VM, but guess what? You own the cloud, right? So when it's not spiking up to that 100% of the VM and it's running at its typical 25 or 30%, that other 75% of the resources are returned to your cloud to be redistributed to your other VMs. And so it takes a bit for companies to get used to that, to go like, oh, wait a second, I can actually provision a large VM and it can run at 25%, spike up occasionally, but when it's not using those resources, my other VMs get to use it. Well, and this was where the big hardware scale actually becomes really handy. When you have this big scale, you can put a bunch of these VMs on there. You can put a bunch of these all variable types of workloads on there. There's lots of different stuff. I'm just using VMs for simplification. But it essentially then returns to you those resources. So it basically means that if you have accidentally made a mistake about these 20 VMs, you're not committed to those 20 VMs. And in fact, they can continue running, and they're running at the low utilization. You could delete them if you're not using them, obviously you should. But it basically then moves your unit of potential mistake at the VM level. It really kind of mitigates that a lot. And instead, if you find out you got a hold of this big private cloud, what Ray said also applies. You know, we're a reasonable company. If you come in and we tell you not to buy this huge thing and you still buy this huge thing, and then you turn out your unit, you're using 20% of it, we'll work something out for you, right? Like that's something that we'll obviously do. But it allows you then to have this unit where you say, I made this mistake on this project, but you know what? I got this other project. I can move that right in. And at the same time, I can spin down the first project because it didn't go for it. And you have that fixed cost that's already there for you to utilize. And so what we found, it's kind of a funny way, is it empowers your development teams to go ahead and spin stuff up, to go ahead and try that thing for the day and not have to go run and ask their manager, or have their manager ask their director ask their VP if it's okay to do this big development spend. You have the resources right there in front of you. Let them do it. Let them do it. And in the system, you have a macro control on cost. So kind of switching over to the FinOps world, because again, you have a macro control, and then you can free your development and systems teams to have the micro control themselves. Spin it up as you see fit. Go for it. And the macro control keeps the overall expense. You know, I always call the on-demand private cloud lets the CFO and the CTO be friends again. Because the CFO has a macro control that they must have. They must have this, right? Like if you don't, this is not good. And the CTO shares that same responsibility with them. And this is like, so anyways, this type of system gives those a place for those two to come back together again. CFO has macro control. CTO's pumped because they can give micro control down to their team. Anyway, there we go. I just wanted to throw that in there.
From an analyst perspective, I feel like I often look at private cloud from the standpoint of, you know, sort of an architectural approach or a kind of security decision or something like that. But it's interesting to think of it in terms of a sort of an accounting. From an accounting standpoint, it's very much like a committed spend, right? It's got a very similar view to that. I wanted to ask, are there aspects of, so, you know, Anirudh, you mentioned a little bit about this. Erik, you mentioned a little bit about this. Are there aspects of, you know, sort of cloud vendor pricing that, in the pricing models themselves, that organizations may not be taking advantage of? Are there things is there low-hanging fruit there that they could be going after? And is it as simple as going from, you know, more going toward from on-demand pricing to more prepaid for a discount, or using, Anirudh, you mentioned reserved instances. I mean, are there things that organizations in your experience typically are not taking advantage of? Maybe let's start with that.
I can take, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Erik,
I think, yeah, Erik, you can go ahead.
Well, I would say in one word, spot instances. So you have them on Azure, you have them on AWS. Basically, these are resources that are lying around basically at the cloud service providers, and they are selling them off at 90% discount. So the only drawback with that is you need a workload that can, within a 2-minute notice period, turn off and continue on another resource, basically fail gracefully, like with checkpoints, and then continue from there. So if your workloads don't have really long-running processes that cannot be interrupted, then you're most likely Spot compatible, and you just need to swap over to Spot, and that gives you 90% cost reduction on one of the biggest cost pillars of public cloud, which is compute. And this is often overlooked. Engineers tend to be a little bit, afraid of it because they don't know. they prefer on-demand or provisioned, so they don't have to maybe re-architecture their workloads to deal gracefully with spot interruptions. Then there are also even tools on top of that that guarantee that you, because the problem is if your spot instance is interrupted and there is no other spot instance available at that moment, you go back on demand. So there is a plethora of tools that will basically see if there are spot tools available and try to switch that back to spot as soon as possible, so you get back to the 90%. So it's perfect for any cluster that's going scaling up and down constantly. But you get, as I said, 90% cost reduction with that. That is one of the biggest overlooked cost reduction, and it's quite easy to implement in most cases.
Yeah, I think spot instance definitely gives a good discount. After CODs, after RIs, after savings plan. And in one of your slides, you had mentioned that there are close to 6 million SKUs that you're currently tracking. And this is obviously across all the type of services that public cloud provides. And I got a mail yesterday from GCP that they've now introduced additional costs for BigQuery data transfer costs. So users typically miss out on all the minor changes that happens to each SKU. And fortunately, the good thing with public cloud is all public clouds provide option to export your billing and usage consumption. So we typically recommend every company to set up some sort of billing export so that you have a report that you can spin up with the default tools itself, some sort of a quick site dashboard or trusted advisor in AWS or a third-party tool to visualize and get the basic reporting and analytics, and monitoring your costs on a day-on-day basis across all services, across all SKUs. And I think that would be the starting point. And of course, the only KPI or the metric to measure is what is the deviation from the forecast and what is the actual cost. So that would be the starting point in getting this.
Okay. We were going to save audience questions for the end, but we did get one thing come in while we were talking there. So this isn't a question per se, but one of our attendees said that, while you were speaking, Erik, that spot instances do require that applications sort of be changed, and that requires that the application be, sort of nearer to stateless. I guess my way of turning that into a question would be like, how would you recommend navigating that?
That depends obviously on the workload itself. In many cases, there are no long-running processes that exceed, typically 2 minutes or so. So the worst case would be that you lose 2 minutes of work. And maybe if you don't have any SLAs and you have long-running things during the night, and you don't have a customer waiting for it, then there is no problem if you have to restart a process, which is typically done automatically. But obviously, if you have a monolith of a code block basically running on your instances and that is interrupted, that's very difficult to make that stateless. So you need to split it out into different kind of services that you maybe have a storage module where you store the temporary data and stuff like that, so that any worker instance could pick that work up again. I hope that makes sense how I described it. Try to dump it down while not too much at the same time. So yeah, I would say it's not like just changing a configuration and turning something on. No, it's not that easy. But compared to re-architecting your whole workload to gain 90% cost reduction, this is definitely the easier way. And in some cases, you just need to, I don't know, if re-architecting, I mean, you should change from from pull to push, or go event distributed applications rather than pulling the whole time. I mean, that is much more work typically than just going from something that cannot be interrupted to something that can be interrupted. Depends on the work case. But I know plenty of opportunities lying around simply where they said, yeah, we'll look into it sooner or later, and are basically burning like, I don't know, 100K a week on compute that they are not saving.
Let me shift gears a little bit here and say, let's say an organization is, kind of wants to become more methodical in controlling for cloud cost, what's the entry point for them for FinOps? What does setting up that tool set, that practice look like? And then what kind of goals should they be setting for themselves? And I wanted to put that to Anirudh to begin with.
Yeah, it is quite surprising if you notice across all organizations. They do not look at the low-hanging fruits across all their accounts that they have, and in most cases they only look at the production accounts and not the staging or the developer accounts. And the good thing about billing exports, when you set it up, it's across the organization, across all the accounts that you have. So we recommend setting the first step as setting up some sort of an external data export that you can take it to BigQuery or AWS Athena or some sort of Looker or Tableau to do some query processing and gain some insights. So the first step would be to set up, to understand your cloud cost by getting the billing exports from the GCP or AWS or Azure, because the default billing consoles do not do justice in breaking down your cloud cost to the granular level. So we would recommend exporting the cost from the cloud providers and matching it with your business needs, and allocating the cost to the right business teams, whether it could be application teams or product teams or business units, as granular as possible. At least 70 or 75% in allocation. And in case if you do not have that, we recommend setting up tags or labels in the first place so that you can attribute your resource workloads. And once that's done, you look at the optimization strategies. Could be right size, could be disks that are unattached, or rate optimization or EDP. But first is understanding your cloud cost, getting the reports and analytics for it, and then proceeding with the optimization strategies for it.
Sure. I wanted to invite Ray to also respond to that as well.
Yeah. So, the general knowledge of FinOps is one about saving money. But that's not really, that's only part of the answer. The real direction here is to getting the most out of your cloud spend to drive efficient growth. And as such, one person or one organization within a company can't do that. It has to be a collaboration of efforts within the same organization. It needs a sponsor. The sponsor can come from bottom up or top down, but it will require a level of funding to basically implement. You need to know what you're spending currently and what's driving that spend to correct that action. Communication is a key, but the process never ends. And that's what we've seen is people treat it as a project and not as a cultural shift. So the larger your company is, the harder it is to implement. But if you are successful, you can limit your cloud costs by assigning the actual spend into organizations or into parts of your company that have a budget, that are fiscally responsible for not only for the expense, but also for the production of that workload that you're spending the money on. So I mean, there's a pretty defined path, Liam, that within FinOps that really identifies this. But the takeaways that I would offer here is it is a cultural change. It's just not based on saving money. It's driving growth through the efficient use of the dollars that you're spending.
I think Erik mentioned earlier that, well, the way I interpreted what he said is you could sort of take any aspect of your application, whether it's performance or security, and look at those things through a cost lens, right? There's a cost to not moving fast. There's a cost to a breach. There's a cost to, a poorly performing application. Erik, did you want to add anything to what's being said here?
Yeah, First of all, I absolutely agree. I would even extend this further and say, within this context, that costs are irrelevant. Because if we try to optimize for cost, I would say, shut everything down, fire everyone, 100% cost cut, where's my bonus, right? So nobody wants that. And the fact is, we aim for efficiency, but what is efficiency? So most CIOs I've known so far, they report the IT budget as a big chunk of costs, as a number, right? And what I try to help them to get to is to track any performance metrics, could be active users per month if you have something subscription model. It could be any, if you are big pharma, then it could be how many simulations you have run in your research teams or anything like that, that somehow has a revenue linked value, okay? And then you create a KPI around that to make it efficiency metrics. And then you report back to the exec level and say, okay, so our revenue stream generated and supported by our IT structure, our workloads, is, I don't know, 10 million, of which 2 million is costs. That is totally different conversation than just saying, okay, our yearly cost for IT with cloud is 2 million. That's it. So I try always away, and I start the conversation always by saying costs are irrelevant. And I find the reactions quite funny, because when you realize that there are even slogans out there for consulting agencies that say optimize for costs, and I really, scratch my head every time when I see that, because obviously either their wording is very bad or they have no clue what they're doing. You should not optimize for costs, because maybe you need to increase costs because your customer is not happy with your service levels. So if your response times are bad because you have cheaping out on an infrastructure, that means you should invest more so you get more customers, more revenue. And I always ask, if 10%, if your costs go up by 10%, what should you do? Most of them say, I need immediately some remediation action. So I know you need to know why they went up. Maybe the revenue doubled and you should go celebrate, right? Mm-hmm. So without any revenue linked metrics, costs are irrelevant. And there is a huge effort required to make companies see that. And that's also one of the questions here of one of of our listeners was, how can you shift from CapEx to OpEx? And what happens in accounting is when you get the first OpEx bills from the cloud, I would summarize that as panic and chaos, because that's the very reason FinOps was created in the first place. Because the monthly bill variable, where the engineers have the buying decision, because with ClickOps you can generate resources that generate costs, that is the horror scene for every legacy company coming from 4-year amortized costs on big projects and planning and buying hardware, be it private or on-prem. So it's like a horror scene for them to have to adapt all the processing, Intel reporting, and mostly, even if you come in as a FinOps practitioner, you ask them, what are the current numbers for this year? They say, I have no idea. Let me get back to you in 2 weeks. And you say, no, I need them now because our costs are going up, right? So it's you need to change a lot, specifically around the how real time your data-driven decision making is, and that's what FinOps is also about.
So we're getting very close to the sort of time we had prepared. Erik, you very nicely sort of preloaded the transition to our audience Q&A for me there. We had a question about the sort of impact of shifting from CapEx to OpEx, or the impact of variable cost on CapEx to OpEx. Does anyone have anything else to add around that? Does anyone want to, or do we feel like Erik's covered it?
Yeah, I can add a couple of sentences here, Liam. So CapEx typically sits on your balance sheet, right? And you expense it over the useful life of the purchase that you just spent. So if you look at on-prem configurations, it costs a sizable amount of money to, like what Todd was saying earlier, to spin up a data center or even a colo facility. Most of that is CapEx, sits on your balance sheet, and then over the useful life of the equipment or whatever it is, you bring it across to the profit and loss. What Erik said about the variable costing model, that immediately hits the P&L. So what typically happens is all eyes are on the profit and loss statement and not really on the balance sheet. Within an organization that has budgets. So it's front and center what you're actually spending on your cloud spend, if it's immediately on the balance sheet. Sometimes companies hide things on the profit and loss statement. Sometimes companies hide things on the balance sheet and expense it over time when it really should be expensed in that month that it was incurred. So variable costs, in my opinion, puts a spotlight on efficiency and responsibility and accountability in organizations, while the balance sheet, the CapEx, is more of a project, right? The company approves $1 million spend, but you only hit, $150,000 of that to the P&L on a yearly basis over a 5-year period, say, or whatever. So these are the accounting tricks that FinOps tries to eliminate, because a spend is a spend, and that's why you need to know your data going into any effort. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Well, while you were speaking, we had another question come in, and this may be a good question to conclude on, as we're getting pretty close to time here. I'm just going to read the whole question because it's pretty long. So it says, Erik and Ray mentioned FinOps in a cloud should be seen as a business driver and not as explicitly a cost savings mumbo jumbo. Erik did mention it's hard to quantify this, but we need some sort of transparency and some ad hoc quantification for FinOps to do justice to unit economics. What are your views on this? So who wants to go first?
I have a trick for this, Erik. And I copied this from security. Basically, the best security department will look like overpriced and incompetent because you have no security issues. So why are you paying them? Right? So you can quantify any cost avoidance. You must quantify cost avoidance with an estimate and report it. Because I've had similar problems when I joined a FinOps journey even before the cloud migration began. And basically, I saved the companies like in the hundreds of millions of dollars of losses, right? And at the end, I had difficulties justifying my salary for that. So, and that was just a tiny fraction of obviously the cost I've saved. So I really reached out. I thought, how can I quantify this? And only when I started saying, okay, these are the estimates of the costs you would have incurred. These are the cost curves. Look here. We broke that down. We made that. You had, you were logging without any retention policies and stuff like that. So you would have accumulative costs on logging unless you started really digging into that. And I prevented that from start. So I can easily say between $20 and $100 million saved for you. And then suddenly, okay, it's fine. Here's your pay. But it's difficult to quantify anything that is an avoided cost, right?
Yeah.
You have to.
Security comparison.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
I would say that's definitely accurate. It's everyone likes, especially in finance and in cost, people like visibility. People like knowing what they're spending. The problem with that way of totally thinking is you're forgetting one thing. If your organization is in a growth mode and you want to increase your revenue, there's no way to do it except for spending money. So the FinOps is a way of making sure as you grow, you're spending it efficiently. That's it. Here it's, if your company is has shrinking revenues, most of the focus is on what? Cost reduction, because you have to hit a margin or a bottom line. So it really depends on, and I love the word unit economics here, because it really links your top line revenue, applying it to whatever that unit is, and yields a margin. So FinOps, once again, it's really not accounting. It really is not finance. It really is a cultural attitude that organizations need to bring inside to link business opportunities or business growth to efficient cloud spend.
Great. Well, we're very close to time here. I wanted to maybe give everyone an opportunity if there's a sort of burning observation that they felt that they haven't been able to make here.
I've got one, and that is with regards to unit economics, and that is my mecca typically, for a couple of reasons. I tell it with a success story. I've been mentoring this young guy who joined a company as a FinOps practitioner. He was very, very frustrated, didn't get any traction, had difficulties getting on, and I helped him, get around the way old geezers like me think and, change the ways of working after 20 years and stuff like that. I helped him mentoring about the psychological warfare almost that you encounter in some FinOps practices. And the thing is, he managed to achieve in 1 year what another FinOps team of 4 people achieved in a similar sector for a similar sized company. And the big difference was this. So rather than trying to be the driver for every FinOps initiative, he basically found some champions and also formalized some virtual workloads where they had the income, so the revenue stream, but also the costs. So they had the innate motivation to drive everything efficiently themselves without having somebody with a bat behind them to think about efficiency. So it was the motivation behind it, because with the cost reduction, they had more room to buy stuff like furniture, pieces of equipment, even a team building event and stuff like that. Why? Because they had an interest to do so. And that was because you gave them the responsibility. Like when your kids grow up and you give them some money, then you also give them responsibility of spending it, right? So you should do the same with business units. If there are no business units, but only horizontal teams, create virtual business units. Who cares? But go in that direction and let them be the driver of the initiatives, and you can maybe initiate them. You can help them. You can recommend. You can, be the anchor for any big complex problem. But they should be the drivers, and that is where unit economics is a huge, huge help.
I think, Leah, probably our last one that I'll throw out, because Anirudh, you didn't do it before. You had mentioned, hey, people really should be looking at their cloud costs. You can export all that. You neglected to mention Economize.cloud, your business, which was very polite of you, but I will throw that out, is this is a fundamental, is get good observability of your spends. Somebody like Economize can obviously help you. And I would also just end on our side is that you can get cloud from the big public clouds, from smaller public clouds. You can get it from on-demand private clouds like us. You can get it from proprietary hosted private clouds. The names that are out there. Bare metal is commonly being used now also and being converted into something that you can use like a cloud. It goes all the way down to co-locations. Very common when you have good, large infrastructure needs, you're going to end up, if you want to be truly, truly efficient, you're going to end up, it depends on scale, you can end up often in co-location, and then of course all the way down to on-prem. We don't deal with those a lot, but we had a potential customer, a large rail company, let's just call it, big data centers, and they're like, why should we do this? And I'm just like, you shouldn't. Like, you already have a giant sunk cost data center. Get rid of the old stuff that's in there and put in like modern private or modern cloud in your data center. but you should still be cloud. But yeah, you're not going to move to the public cloud. Why would you bother doing that? You're already in a great spot for that. So I'll just say, yeah, I think I just want to end is that I think it's exciting for FinOps to have so many options now and FinOps is now getting to bring to bear lots of different ways to do cloud. So yeah, exciting. Thank you for having us, Liam. I'm not sure what else we've got to finish up on them, but I think, yeah, sorry, Anirudh, I wanted to put that in there for you because you were too polite to say so. But I think it is really important to be take observability very seriously, as you all know. So, all right, yeah, I think that was just my piece.
So I think that's a great note to finish on. Thank you very much for everyone's contributions to the discussion. I wanted to thank everyone of the attendees for joining the discussion today, and thank you for submitting great questions. This has been a real pleasure, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.